Hello, Story Store listeners. If you guys like this story, please subscribe to Story Store and hit the bell icon. Thank you. Harold Thompson had moved into apartment 3B in 1971, a year when the city seemed to hum with possibility. The building, nestled in a lively neighborhood filled with working-class families, had been a perfect place to start a life with his wife, Clara. Back then, their apartment wasn't just four walls, it was a dream made real. The hardwood floors, though scuffed and worn over time, had gleamed when they first arrived. The kitchen, modest but functional, had hosted countless meals prepared with love and shared in laughter. Over the years, Harold and Clara transformed the space into a sanctuary. It was here that they raised their two children, marking the walls with pencil lines to track their heights as they grew. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries, each one etched into the fabric of their home. The living room still held the armchair where Clara would sit, knitting quietly while Harold read aloud. Even after her passing a decade earlier, Harold couldn't bear to move the chair. It remained a tangible reminder of her presence. The neighborhood evolved around him. Families moved out, new ones moved in, and the once affordable rents began to climb. Harold witnessed gentrification's slow march, transforming familiar streets into something unrecognizable. Cafes replaced corner stores, and sleek condos loomed where modest homes once stood. Yet Harold stayed, clinging to the life he and Clara had built together. As a young man, Harold had been known as a pillar of the community. A civil rights attorney by trade, he spent decades advocating for justice. When tenants faced unscrupulous landlords, Harold was often the first to step in, providing guidance and reassurance. His reputation for fairness and strength earned him the respect of his neighbors and the gratitude of those he helped. Now, in his twilight years, Harold found himself in a position he had once fought to protect others from. The very walls that had borne witness to his family's joys and struggles were at risk of being taken from him. Yet, as he sat in his armchair, the eviction notice trembling in his hands, Harold resolved that he would not go quietly. This was his home, and he would fight to protect it, not just for himself, but for the legacy of a life well lived. Robert Pierce wasn't the first landlord to own the building, but he was by far the most ruthless. Having purchased the property during a housing boom, Robert's sole focus was profit. He saw the building's longtime tenants as nothing more than obstacles to his ambitious plans. Harold, with his decades-old rent-controlled lease, was the biggest thorn in Robert's side. To Robert, Harold's apartment was a gold mine waiting to be tapped. The rent Harold paid was a fraction of what newer tenants were charged, thanks to the protections offered by the city's housing laws. Robert's frustration wasn't just financial, it was personal. He viewed Harold's resistance as defiance, a challenge to his authority and his vision for the building's future. But Robert's motives weren't rooted solely in greed. Beneath his polished exterior lurked a prejudice he rarely bothered to conceal. He resented Harold not only for his age and financial position, but also for his history. Harold's status as a black man who had achieved respect and stability in a time when systemic barriers sought to prevent it infuriated Robert. To him, Harold was an unwelcome reminder of the past, an inconvenient truth in a neighborhood he wanted to reinvent. Robert had successfully pushed out other tenants before Harold. Families and individuals who couldn't afford the legal battles or endure the harassment eventually left. He employed a variety of tactics: sudden rent hikes, neglecting repairs, and even cutting off utilities. For those who resisted, he leaned on intimidation, confident that his power and resources would eventually wear them down. But Harold was different. His quiet dignity and unwavering resolve unnerved Robert. Every eviction notice, every threat, and every condescending remark seemed to bounce off Harold, as though the older man had built an impenetrable wall around himself. What Robert failed to understand was that Harold's strength came from a lifetime of fighting battles far greater than this one. For Harold, this was more than a personal fight. It was a matter of principle, a stand against injustice that he couldn't ignore. As Robert plotted his next move, he underestimated the network Harold had quietly built over the years. Neighbors who remembered his kindness, former colleagues who respected his work, and even strangers inspired by his story were ready to rally around him. Robert believed he was fighting one man, but Harold's resilience had the power to unite an entire community, a fact that would soon become Robert's undoing. The night after receiving the eviction notice, Harold called his daughter, Janine. Now, a successful lawyer, Janine had inherited her father's sense of justice. She listened intently as he explained the situation, anger simmering in her voice. "Dad, he can't do this. We'll fight it." Janine immediately set to work, reaching out to legal experts and tenant rights advocates. Harold's former colleagues and students, many of whom still admired him for his work as a civil rights attorney, offered their support. Together, they built a strategy to counter Robert's attempts. News of Harold's plight spread quickly. Neighbors, many of whom remembered Harold's kindness over the years, rallied to his defense. They organized meetings, started petitions, and contacted local media. Harold's story struck a chord, highlighting issues of housing discrimination and gentrification. Local tenants' rights organizations stepped in to provide additional resources. Protests outside the building drew attention to Robert's tactics, while social media campaigns amplified Harold's fight to a broader audience. Robert's frustration grew as Harold's supporters gained momentum. He retaliated with petty and illegal tactics, cutting off utilities, ignoring maintenance requests, and issuing threats. Harold documented every incident, his legal expertise proving invaluable. Janine ensured the evidence was meticulously organized, creating a damning record of Robert's harassment. Despite the challenges, Harold remained steadfast, bolstered by the support of his family and community. The case finally made its way to court. The room was packed with reporters, activists, and supporters. Harold sat beside Janine, his presence a quiet defiance against Robert's arrogance. The judge listened as Janine presented evidence of Robert's discriminatory practices and illegal actions. When Harold took the stand, his testimony was heartfelt and compelling. He spoke of his life in the apartment, the memories he had built, and the pain of facing eviction. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Harold's eviction was declared illegal, and Robert was ordered to pay fines for his harassment and discrimination. The court's decision was a victory not only for Harold, but for tenants everywhere who faced similar struggles. Robert's reputation was irreparably damaged, and his building came under scrutiny from housing authorities. Harold's resilience and the community's solidarity had triumphed over greed and prejudice. With the legal battle behind him, Harold returned to his apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. The walls that had witnessed decades of his life now held the story of his victory. His home remained a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right. The community continued to support Harold, ensuring he had everything he needed to live comfortably. And as for Robert Pierce, his downfall served as a warning to others who sought to exploit the vulnerable. Harold's fight had changed more than his own circumstances. It had sparked a movement, reminding everyone that justice could prevail when people stood together.